For more on this, I'm now joined by our U.S. correspondent, Simon Marks, who joins us live from Washington. A very good afternoon, South African time. Simon Marks, the most successful 100 days of any American in history. Is this sentiment being shared in the corridors of power in Washington?
Well, you know, I think that the heart of the speech that President Trump made there in Michigan, Vuyo, was kind of encapsulated by his embrace of the Economist newspaper, which last weekend said that Donald Trump had been already the most consequential president in American history in terms of his first 100 days. But what Donald Trump didn't tell the crowd is that the Economist also argued that in that 100 days he had done lasting damage to the United States in terms of its democracy, in terms of the constitutional guardrails that he has largely steamrollered, in terms of his dramatic expansion of executive power, and most importantly, in terms of America's standing with the rest of the world, the impact that he's had on alliances that the United States has enjoyed for decades in many cases. So, I mean, this was an up is down, black is white, right is left speech that the president made that was full of falsehoods, frankly. I mean, interpretations that he is placing on all of this tsunami of activity that we've seen over the last 100 days that are just not borne out by the facts. We learnt this morning, within the last couple of hours, that the US economy in the first 3 months of this year shrank by 0.3%. GDP down by 0.3%. That's a disaster for the United States, and it's indicative of the fact that so many foreign exporters and American customers of those foreign goods were surging imports into the United States because they knew that Donald Trump's tariff war was coming. Every economist here argues that that trade war is going to lead to inflation. The president insisted yesterday that prices on everything are coming down. He claimed that mortgage rates are coming down. That's simply not true. The average mortgage rate here is now somewhere between 6.5% and 7%. That is having a massive impact, depressing demand for home purchases in the United States. So a whole raft of the claims that he made in that speech yesterday about his achievements, in fact, reflect achievements that exist in his mind. Now, he did say that he had successfully sealed the US border with Mexico, and there's no question that that matters greatly to his supporters. And while he overstated the impact that has had on illegal immigration, he's without question delivered to his supporters on that issue. And many Democrats wonder why President Joe Biden didn't take similar steps to try and quell the tide of illegal migration into the country. But this was a speech that was essentially, I think, firing the starting gun in two separate battles. First of all, the midterm elections in November of next year. Who on earth could vote for the Democrats, he asked rhetorically of the crowd that had been told that the Democrats were all radical left communists. And then he was starting the firing gun in a battle with the US Supreme Court. He urged the Supreme Court to intervene and overrule lower-level judges that he says are trying to constrain his authority. And the story of the next 100 days, I think in many ways, is whether Donald Trump simply steamrollers the judiciary here as he wants to do.
He also claimed, of course, that the tariffs, of course, we are still in that 90-day window period, but he did claim that they are going to lead to a resurgence in domestic manufacturing.
Well, all economists say that even if the tariffs do stay in place long enough to bring about a resurgence in domestic manufacturing, and he was there in Michigan, the heartland, a state where the American auto industry is largely based, it's going to take a very long time for that to happen. And again, he engaged in disinformation about the tariffs. He said that trillions of dollars were now pouring into the country as a result of these tariffs, that he had eradicated limited largely America's trade deficits. Well, that's not true. I mean, 24 hours ago, there was fresh data that showed the United States trade deficit had reached a record in the first quarter of this year because of his economic policies and the instability that they have caused. And the difficulty in all of this for the South African government and for other governments around the world is, how do you actually engage in a conversation on tariffs or on all the other issues that have bedeviled the US relationship with South Africa since Donald Trump returned to the White House? How do you engage in a productive conversation that can actually resolve some of these issues when time and again you're dealing with a president of the United States who simply is not trafficking in facts? There's no possibility of stipulating to facts in many of these conversations, and that is why so many countries, Japan already, the Chinese, for example, countries in Europe, are finding it incredibly difficult to complete these negotiations to try and reduce the worst impacts of the tariffs.
I mean, he signed at least 142 executive orders so far, which some people have argued is in many ways a subversion of democracy, even though he is not, I mean, he is allowed to do so, but the fact that he does not require, I mean, these are moves that do not require congressional approval, and where there's been disquiet around them. Has that issue resurfaced as people were doing or continue to do this review of 100 days, that perhaps beyond this point, something else or something has to give, rather?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, all of this activity that we see every day, this tsunami of executive orders that tumble from his desk, are designed to override the role of Congress here in the United States. He's waiting for Congress to pass what he describes as his own beautiful New Deal, which will see substantial amounts of tax cuts that the White House argues will stimulate the economy and will help it navigate what they call a transition away from Joe Biden's addiction to public expenditure and towards an era in which the United States is going to revive its manufacturing industries. But what he's really engaged in is an effort to derail and ignore Congress, to concentrate power in the hands of an ever more powerful executive. That's one of the reasons why he is already flagrantly ignoring court orders. For example, court orders that have suggested that he didn't have the power to shut down the US Agency for International Development. Imagine the impacts of that shutdown. Well, we don't even have to imagine them now, because Boston University School of Public Health says that every hour of every day, 103 people are needlessly dying because USAID has been shut down. And many of those deaths, of course, are taking place on the African continent. There are all sorts of challenges to other things that he's done, including the mass deportations, the shutdown of Voice of America. We will see legal challenges on virtually every executive order that he delivers. But this is how he's choosing to govern, and it's deliberate strategy. It is a deliberate revolutionary strategy to change the nature of American governance and to test the country's time-honored constitutional guardrails that largely, in the first 100 days, have proved very ineffective.
Of course. I mean, that's not to say he doesn't have people who believe in what he may have done and said, who may believe that he is actually kept his promises, whether it's around stricter immigration policies or making the economy work for Americans. He does have people who believe he is on the right path, doesn't he?
No question about it. And there were thousands of them in that arena in Michigan last night. He received a hero's welcome there. They believe that he is going to revive the manufacturing base in Michigan and other Rust Belt states. They absolutely cheered and applauded his claims to have dramatically cut off the flow of illegal immigrants into the United States. He called that the number one issue that had propelled him back into the White House. It's not evident that that's the case, because exit polls suggested people were driven by the economy. So ultimately, Donald Trump is going to rise or fall on this issue of whether he's right and that the protectionism in which he's engaged is going to help the economy bounce back, coupled with those tax cuts. But at the moment, he's absolutely trading on the immigration issue, and I think we'll be hearing lots more of that throughout the midterm election campaign. And then there are issues that he's engaged in that appall people here in the sort of foreign policy elites. For example, the State Department overhaul that is going to see a dramatic reduction in the number of embassies and consulates throughout Africa. A Trump administration that is essentially walking away from even the limited interest that it had in the continent. That deeply worries career foreign policy observers here in Washington, D.C. and former government officials. But honestly, with Donald Trump's base, they're delighted. They think that he's saving the government money. They think that that will trim the kind of waste and fraud that Donald Trump says he has identified in public expenditure. So a lot of these issues are designed to play to his base. And he was open in that Michigan speech about not being concerned about opinion polls that show that his approval rating has fallen to 42%, because he argues that among what he calls legitimate pollsters, his approval rating is actually 60 or 70%. No idea where he's getting those numbers from. But legitimately, he can point to opinion polls that show, even with a low approval rating, he's more popular than the Democrats. The Democrat leadership in Congress now with an approval rating in the mid-30s. Charles Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, the Democrats' leader in the Senate, the former Majority Leader, his own personal approval rating only 17% here. So compared to the Democrats, Donald Trump's still looking pretty good.
Simon Marks, let's leave it there for now. Simon Marks on Donald Trump's 100-day scorecard, whether you're talking about executive orders, tariffs, foreign policy, you name it, everyone has, of course, weighed in on what he has or hasn't done in the 100 days that he has been in office. But from the man himself, he thinks he has done a great job. Thank you very much. It's been the most successful 100 days of any American president.